that have had someone object at your wedding? What happened? Story 1. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My fiancée, Emily, and I had meticulously planned every detail of our wedding for over a year. The ceremony was set in a beautiful old church, and the reception would follow at a charming countryside inn. The guest list was perfect. The decorations were stunning, and even the weather was cooperating. The ceremony started smoothly. Emily walked down the aisle looking radiant in her white dress, and I could feel tears welling up as I watched her. We exchanged vows, and everything seemed to be going perfectly until the officiant asked the fateful question.
If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or hold your peace. A murmur went through the crowd, and I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My heart started to race. In the back of the church, a voice objected and turned to see who it was. Standing there was Emily's ex-past. Expected him to... "You can't marry him, Emily," Jake shouted, stumbling slightly. "I still love you." Gripped my hand to gauge her, but her eyes were fixed on Jake. "This is insane," I whispered. "Let's get him out." I could act. Emily's father stood up, his face red with anger. "You have no right to be here, Jake. Leave now or I'll call the police." Jake staggered forward, ignoring Emily's father. "Emily, please," he pleaded. "Remember the good times we had. You don't really love him." Emily finally found her voice. "Jake, you need to leave. This is my wedding day and you're ruining." Jake wasn't listening.
He continued to profess his love, making the situation more and more uncomfortable. Finally, my best man Tom and a couple of other groomsmen stepped in, physically escorting Jake out of the church. I could hear him yelling all the way down the aisle. The ceremony resumed, but the mood had shifted. Emily was visibly shaken, and I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. We managed to finish our vows and were pronounced husband and wife, but the moment was tainted by the earlier chaos. At the reception, everyone tried to move past the incident, but it hung over us like a dark cloud. People whispered about Jake's outburst, and Emily and I had to reassure concerned guests that everything was fine. We put on brave faces and tried to enjoy but the memory of Jake's objection lingered. As we danced our first dance as a married couple, Emily leaned in and whispered, "I'm so sorry. No idea he would do something." "It's not your fault," I replied, holding her close. "Let's just focus on us and the future." We made it through the rest of the night surrounded by friends and family who did their best to lift our spirits. But that moment in the church when Jake objected is something I'll never forget. It was a harsh reminder that even on the most carefully planned day, life can throw unexpected and unwelcome surprises. Story 2. My wedding was like a scene out of a romantic comedy, but without the happy ending. I should have known things were off when my mother-in-law showed up in a white dress. But I was too focused on the day to care. Everything was going fine until the reception. That's when my best friend Dave decided to object. The ceremony had been beautiful, and I was on cloud 9. My wife, Sarah, looked stunning, and we were surrounded by our closest friends and family. The reception was in full swing, with everyone dancing, laughing, and celebrating our love. Dave had been my best man, and I thought he was genuinely happy for us. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed, things took a turn. It started subtly. During his best man speech, Dave made a few offhand jokes about how he never thought anyone would tame. The crowd laughed, and I brushed it off as typical Dave humor. But then he kept drinking and drinking. By the time the DJ announced that it was time for toasts, Dave was well past tipsy. "All right, everyone," Dave slurred into the microphone. "I've got something to say." The room quieted down, and all eyes turned to him. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Dave, maybe you've had enough," I said, trying to lighten the mood. But he ignored me. No, this is important," he insisted. He turned to Sarah and me, his eyes glassy. "You guys, you shouldn't be married." A collective gasp went through the room. Sarah's face went pale, and I could feel the blood draining from mine. "Dave, what the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. Dave wobbled slightly, using the microphone stand to steady himself. "You guys don't belong together," he continued. "Sarah, you're too good for him. And Mike's still in love with me." The room was dead silent. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dave laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You know what I'm saying. We've been best friends forever, but it's more than that, isn't it, Mike? We've been through everything together, and now you're just leaving." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dave, you're drunk. This isn't the time or the place." He wasn't done. "I'm not drunk enough," then raised his voice again. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but you deserve the truth. Mike and we've been in love for years. He just won't admit it." I stood there, stunned. Sarah looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Is this true?" her voice breaking. "No," I exclaimed. "Dave, I love you like a brother, but this is insane. Sarah, you're my everything. He's drunk and confused. The room erupted into chaos. My parents were yelling at Dave to leave. Sarah's family looked horrified, and our friends were in shock. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. In the end, Dave was escorted out by some of the groomsmen, still mumbling about how I was making a mistake. The rest of the reception was a blur. Sarah and I tried to salvage the night, but the damage was done. The joy and excitement had been sucked out of the room, replaced by awkwardness and tension. We spent our honeymoon trying to process what had happened. Sarah couldn't shake the doubt that Dave's outburst had planted, and I was torn between anger and sorrow for my friend. We tried to move past it, but the shadow of that night loomed over. Our marriage didn't last. The trust was broken, and we couldn't rebuild it. Dave's words had opened a wound that never fully healed. To this day, I don't know if he really believed what he said or if it was just the alcohol talking. All I know is that one drunken speech ruined what should have been the best day of my life. Story 3. The day of my wedding started with a sense of excitement and anticipation. My bride, Jenna, and I had been planning this day for over a year. We had chosen a picturesque garden venue, perfect for our intimate ceremony. As I stood at the altar, I couldn't help but feel like the luckiest man alive. Everything was going smoothly until the moment the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. I held my breath, praying that no one would say anything. But then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang, "I object." Everyone turned to see who it was. Standing there was my estranged sister, Lisa. We hadn't spoken in years due to a family feud that had torn us apart. She was the last person I expected to see, let alone object at my wedding. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. "I had to come, Matt," she said, stepping. "I need to talk to you." "This isn't the time or place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, just leave." But Lisa shook her head. "No, this is important. Jenna, you need to know the truth." Jenna looked at me, confusion and fear. "What truth?" she asked. Lisa took a deep breath. "Matt has been hiding something from you. Something big." I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "Lisa, don't do this," I pleaded, but she ignored me. "Matt has a daughter, a 6-year-old girl named Emily. He's been hiding her from everyone." The crowd gasped, and Jenna's face turned pale. "Is this true, Matt?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Yes, it's true," I admitted, "but it's not what you think." Jenna took a step back, tears streaming down her face. "How could you keep this from me?" "I was going to tell you," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Just didn't know. Lisa stepped forward again. "You should have told her from the start, Matt. She deserves to know the truth." The officiant cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he suggested. But Jenna shook her head. "No, I need to know everything. Now." I took a deep breath and began to explain. "Emily's mother and I had a brief relationship before I met you, Jenna. When she found out she was pregnant, she moved away and didn't tell me about Emily until a year ago. I've been trying to build a relationship with my daughter ever since, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you'd leave me." Jenna looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hurt and betrayal. "I can't believe you kept this from me," she said, her voice shaking. "How can I trust you now?" "I love you, Jenna," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't want to lose you." She wiped away her tears, taking a deep breath. "I need some time to think," she said finally. "I can't do this right now." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing at the altar, feeling like my world had just crumbled around me. The guests murmured amongst themselves, unsure of what to do. Lisa stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, but she needed to know. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I know," I said quietly. "I just wish it didn't have to be like this." In the end, the wedding was good. Jenna needed time to process everything, and I couldn't blame her. I had made a terrible mistake by keeping such a big secret from her. It took months for us to even begin to rebuild our relationship, and things were never quite the same. Lisa and I eventually reconciled, and I built a stronger bond with my daughter Emily. But the memory of that day and the pain I caused Jenna will always haunt. It's a reminder that honesty is always the best policy, no matter how difficult it might be. Story 4. You always hear about wedding disasters, but you never think it'll happen to you. My wedding to Claire was supposed to be a simple, joyful occasion. We'd planned an outdoor ceremony by the lake, surrounded by close friends and family. Everything was going perfectly until it wasn't. As we stood at the altar, holding hands and gazing into each other's eyes, the officiant asked if anyone objected to our union. It was a standard part of the ceremony, something we didn't think twice about. But then, from the back of the crowd, a loud voice called out, "I object!" The crowd turned to see who it was. There stood Claire's father, looking more furious than I'd ever seen him. "You can't marry this man, Claire," he shouted.
Claire's grip on my hands tightened, and I could feel her trembling. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. Her father stormed down the aisle, pointing a finger at, "This man is a liar and a cheat," he proclaimed.
"He's been hiding something from you, something you deserve to know." I felt my stomach drop. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew it couldn't be good. "Mr. Thompson, please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What is this about?" He turned to Claire, his face contorted with anger. "He's been seeing another woman," he spat. "I have proof." Claire's eyes widened in shock, and she turned to me, her face pale. "Is this true?" she asked. I shook my head vehemently. "No, it's not true," I said. "I would never do that to you." But her father wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and started showing Claire a series of photos. "Look at these," he demanded. "Explain these." Claire's face turned even paler as she looked at the photos. "These were taken months ago," she whispered. "Who is she?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "She's an old friend," I said. "We met up a few times to catch up, but nothing happened. I swear." Her father scoffed. "Do you really expect us to believe that?" he asked. "You're lying through your teeth." The crowd was silent, watching the drama unfold. I could feel their eyes on me, judging me. I turned to Claire, desperation in my eyes. "Claire, you have to believe me," I pleaded. "Nothing happened. I love you." Claire looked torn, her eyes darting between me and her father. Finally, she turned, her voice fishy, and nodded and stepped some space. Claire's father stood there, smug, as if he had won some sort. "I wanted to punch him," she said, her voice bare. "No, I didn't," I said. "I would never." She looked into my eyes, searching for the truth. Finally, she nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "I believe you," she said, "but we need to figure out what to do about my father." We returned to the altar hand in hand. Claire's father was still standing there, looking smug. "We've talked," Claire said, her voice steady, "and I believe him. We're going to continue with the ceremony." Her father's face fell and he started to protest, but Claire cut him off. "Dad, you've caused enough trouble for one day," she said. "If you can't support us, then you need to leave." He looked shocked, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked away, leaving the ceremony in stunned silence. The officiant cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony, but the mood had shifted. The joy and excitement had been replaced by tension and unease. We finished our vows and were pronounced husband and wife, but it didn't feel like the joyous occasion we had envisioned. The reception was awkward, with people whispering and giving us sympathetic looks. Claire and I did our best to put on brave faces, but it was clear that the day had been tainted. In the end, we managed to salvage our wedding day, but it was a bittersweet victory. Claire's relationship with her father was never the same, and the memory of his objection lingered over us for years. It was a harsh reminder that even the most carefully planned events can go awry, and that sometimes the people we trust the most can be the ones who hurt us the deepest. Story 5. Weddings are supposed to be joyous occasions filled with love and celebration, but my wedding turned into a nightmare when someone objected. It wasn't just any objection, though. It was my own brother, Ryan. Everything had been perfect up to that point. The church was beautifully decorated, and I stood at the altar nervously awaiting my bride, Hannah. When she appeared at the end of the aisle, my heart nearly burst with happiness. She looked stunning, and I knew I was the luckiest man alive. The ceremony was going smoothly. We exchanged vows, and I could feel the love and support from our friends and family. Then the officiant asked the dreaded question, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace." For a moment, there was silence. I held my breath, hoping that no one would say anything. But then from the back of the church, Ryan's voice rang out, "I object." Everyone turned to look at him, and I felt a wave of dread wash over. Ryan had always been the black sheep of the family, constantly getting into trouble and causing problems, but I never expected him to do something. "Ryan, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the church. He stumbled forward, clearly drunk. "You can't marry her, Jake," he slurred. She's not who you think she is." Hannah's face turned pale, and she gripped my hand. "What's going on?" I whispered. I felt my anger rising. "Ryan, get out of here," I said through gritted teeth. "You're drunk and you're making a fool of yourself." Ryan wouldn't listen. "No, Jake, you need to know the truth," he insisted. "Hannah's been lying to you." "Hannah," my heart break. "Is this true?" My voice trembling. Hannah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Jake, I swear I haven't lied to you." Ryan stumbled closer, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "I found this," he said, waving it in the air. "It's an email from Hannah to another man. She's been cheating on you." The crowd gasped, and I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I took the paper from Ryan's hand and read it, my hands shaking.
It was an email, all right, but it was addressed to her brother, who had been helping her plan a surprise for me. I turned to Ryan, my anger boiling over. "This is her brother, you idiot!" I shouted.
You've ruined everything. Ryan looked confused, then ashamed. I didn't know, he stammered. I turned to Hannah, who was crying uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, I said, pulling her into my arms. I should have known better. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should take a moment, he suggested. But Hannah shook her head. No, let's finish this, she said, her voice steady. I love you, Jake, and nothing will change that. We finished the ceremony, but the mood had shifted. The joy and excitement had been replaced by tension and unease. Ryan was escorted out by a couple of my friends, and the rest of the day was a blur of awkward conversations and forced smiles. The reception was difficult. Hannah and I tried to enjoy ourselves, but the memory of Ryan's objection lingered over us. Guests whispered and avoided eye contact, and it felt like everyone was walking on eggshells. In the end, we managed to get through the day, but it wasn't the wedding we had dreamed of. Ryan's actions had cast a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Our relationship with him was never the same, and it took years to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Looking back, I realized that weddings are fragile things, easily disrupted by the actions of others. But despite the pain and the heartache, I wouldn't change it. Hannah and I faced the challenge together, and our love grew stronger because of it. And that's what truly matters. Story 6. My wedding to Rachel was shaping up to be a fairy tale. The venue was an old, rustic barn that had been beautifully restored, decorated with twinkling lights and lush flowers. The weather was perfect, and all our friends and family were gathered to celebrate our love. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. We were standing at the altar, the officiant guiding us through our vows. I was nervous but excited, looking forward to the life Rachel and I were about to start together. The officiant asked the inevitable question. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence was palpable, and I let out a small sigh. But then a voice from the back of the room broke the quiet. I object! Everyone turned to see who it was. Standing there was Rachel's old college friend. She looked upset, her face flushed with emotion. Anna, what are you doing? Rachel asked, her voice shaking. Anna walked forward, her eyes fixed on Rachel. Rachel, I can't let you go through with this, she said. You deserve to. The pit form in my stomach. What truth? I asked, trying to keep my voice. Anna looked at me, then back. Rachel, I know you've been having doubts about Mike, she said. You've confided in me about how you're not sure if he's the one. Rachel's face turned white. Anna, that was a long time ago, she said. Things have changed. But Anna shook. Have they? You still talk about those doubts. I can't let you marry him without being sure. I felt a surge of Anna, this is not your place, I said. Rachel and I have worked through our issues. We're ready for this. But Rachel looked torn, her eyes filling with tears. Am I doing this? She whispered. Because I care about you, Anna said, her voice breaking. I don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret. The crowd was silent, watching the drama unfold. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath. Rachel, do you still have doubts? I asked, my voice trembling. Rachel looked at me, her eyes full of pain. I don't know, she said. What I did, but now I just want to but if you're not sure, we need to talk. Rachel looked torn, glancing between Anna and me. Finally, she nodded. We need to talk, she said quietly. The officiant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should take a moment, he suggested. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Rachel and I found a quiet corner outside the barn, and I took her hands. Rachel, I need to know how you really feel, I said. Do you want to marry me? She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Mike, she said. These doubts. I'm scared of making the wrong decision. Lump in my... It's okay to be scared, I said. But we need to be sure. If you have doubts, we should talk about it. We spent the next hour talking, laying everything out in the open. It was painful, but necessary. In the end, we decided to postpone the wedding. We needed time to sort through our feelings and make sure we were making the right choice. The guests were understanding, but the day was tinged with sadness. Rachel and I spent the next few months in couples therapy, working through our issue. It wasn't easy, but we came out stronger on the other side. Eventually, we rescheduled the wedding, and this time there were no objections. We stood at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones, and exchanged vows with confidence and love. The memory of that first wedding attempt lingered, but it served as a reminder of how far we'd come. In the end, it wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned, but it was real and honest, and that made it even more beautiful. Story 7. From the moment we announced our engagement, everyone knew our wedding would be the event of the year. Emma and I had been together for 7 years, high school sweethearts who had grown up together. Our families were close and our friends were practically family. The wedding was set to be a grand celebration of love and togetherness. The ceremony took place in a historic mansion with sprawling gardens and elegant decor. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. Just as the officiant was about to pronounce us husband and wife, my cousin Mark stood up and shouted, "I object!" A murmur ran through the crowd and I could feel Emma's hand tighten around mine. "Mark, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice edged with panic. Mark looked around, clearly nervous but determined. "I can't let this happen," he said. "Emma, you need to know the truth about Dave." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Mark stepped forward, his face pale. "Emma, David has been seeing someone else," he said. "He's been lying to you." Emma turned to me, her eyes wide with shock. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head vehemently. "No, it's not true," I said. "Mark, you're making a huge mistake." Mark wasn't backing down. "I saw him," he insisted, "with my own eyes. He was with another woman." Tears welling up in her eyes. "David, please tell me this isn't true." I felt a surge of despair. "I must be mistaken," he said. "I saw him as we took a step." "Be honest with me," she said. "I can't marry you if there's a wave of promise you only." The crowd was silent. I could feel their eyes on me, judging. Finally, Emma turned to the officiant. "I need a moment," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. The officiant nodded and stepped back, giving us some space. Emma and I walked away from the altar, finding a quiet corner. "David, I need to know the truth," she said, her voice breaking. "Have you been seeing someone else?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, Emma, I haven't," I said. "I don't know why Mark is saying these things, but I swear to you, I've been faithful." She looked into my eyes, searching for the truth. Finally, she nodded. "I believe you," she said, "but we need to find out why Mark is doing this." We returned to the altar, and Emma addressed the crowd. "We're going to take a short break," she said. "Please bear with us." We took Mark aside and demanded an explanation. He insisted he had seen me with another woman, but when pressed for details, his story started to fall apart. It became clear that he had misinterpreted what he saw. The woman he had seen me with was my cousin, visiting from out of town, and our interaction had been entirely innocent. Mark apologized profusely. The damage had been. The mood of the wedding was shattered, and Emma and I were left to pick up the pieces. We managed to salvage the day, bittersweet celebration. In the end, Emma and I got married. But the memory of Mark's objection lingered. It took time to rebuild the trust and joy that had been tainted by that moment of doubt. But we did it, together, and our love grew stronger as a result. It wasn't the perfect wedding we had envisioned, but it was a testament to our resilience and commitment to each other. And that's what truly matters. Story 8. My wedding to Jane was supposed to be a small, intimate affair. We wanted something simple and meaningful, surrounded by our closest friends and family. The ceremony was held in a quaint little chapel, the kind you'd see in a storybook, with ivy climbing the stone walls and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Everything was perfect, until the moment the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. I didn't expect anyone to say anything. After all, Jane and I had been together for 5 years, and everyone knew how much we loved each other. But then, from the back of the chapel, a voice called out, "I object!" The room went silent, and all heads turned to see who it was. Standing there was Jane's ex-boyfriend, Tom. He looked agitated, his face flushed with emotion. "Tom, what are you doing here?" Jane asked, her voice trembling. Tom walked forward, his eyes locked on Jane. "I can't let you marry him, Jane," he said. "You deserve to know the truth." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What truth?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Tom looked at me, then back at Jane. "Jane, I know you've been struggling with this decision," he said. "You've told me yourself that you're not sure if you're making the right choice." Jane's face turned pale. "Tom, that was a long time ago," she said. "Things have changed." But Tom shook his head. "Have they?" he asked. "You still talk about your doubts. I can't let you go through with this without being sure." I felt a surge of anger. "Tom, this is not your place," I said. "Jane and I have worked through our issues. We're ready for this." But Jane looked torn, her eyes filling with tears. "Tom, why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because I care about you," Tom said, his voice breaking. "I don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret." The crowd was silent, watching the drama unfold. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath. "Jane, do you still have doubts?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jane looked at me, her eyes full of pain. "I don't know," she said. "I thought I did, but now I'm not sure." I felt a wave of despair. "Jane, I love you," I said. "I want to spend my life, but if you're not sure, we need to talk." Jane looked torn, glancing between. Finally, she nodded. "We need to talk," she said quietly. The officiant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he suggested. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Jane and I found a quiet corner outside the chapel, and I took her hands in mine. "Jane, I need to know how you really feel," I said. Do you want to marry me? She looked at me, tears streaming down. I love you, she said, but I have these doubts. I'm scared of making the wrong decision. It's okay to be scared, I said, but we need to be sure. If you have doubts, we should talk. We spent the next hour talking, laying everything out in the open. It was painful, but necessary. In the end, we decided to postpone the wedding. We needed time to sort through our feelings and make sure we were making the right choice. The guests were understanding, but the day was tinged with sadness. Jane and I spent the next few months in couples therapy, working through our issue. It wasn't easy, but we came out stronger on the other side. Eventually, we rescheduled the wedding, and this time there were no objections. We stood at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones, and exchanged vows with confidence and love. The memory of that first wedding attempt lingered, but it served as a reminder of how far we'd come. In the end, it wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned, but it was real and honest. And that made it even more beautiful. Story 9. Weddings are supposed to be joyous occasions, filled with love and celebration. But my wedding turned into a nightmare when someone objected. It wasn't just any objection, though. It was my own mother. Everything had been perfect up to that point. The church was beautifully decorated, and I stood at the altar, nervously awaiting my bride, Sarah. When she appeared at the end of the aisle, my heart nearly burst with happiness. She looked stunning. I knew I was the luckiest man. The ceremony was going smooth. We exchanged vows, and I could feel the love and support from our friends. The officiant asked the dreaded question, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace." For a moment, there was silence. I held my breath, hoping that no one would say anything. But then, from the front row, my mother's voice rang out, "I object!" Everyone turned to look at her, and I felt a wave of dread wash over. My mother had always been overprotective and controlling, but I never expected her to do something. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice edged with. She stood up, her face pale but determined. "I can't let you marry her, David," she said. "She's not right for you." Sarah's face turned pale, and she gripped. "Mrs. Johnson, please," she said. "This isn't the time." My mother wouldn't listen. "No, David needs to know the truth," she said. "Sarah's been hiding something." I felt my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. She looked around, clearly nervous but determined. "Sarah has been lying to you," she said. "She's been seeing someone else." Sarah turned to me, her eyes. "Is this true?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, it's not true," I said. "Mom, you're making a huge mistake." But my mother wasn't backing down. "I saw her," she insisted. "With my own eyes. She was with another man." Sarah looked at me, tears welling up in her. "David, please tell me this isn't true," she whispered. I felt a wave of desperation. "Sarah, I promise you I haven't been with anyone else," I said. "My mother must be mistaken." But my mother shook her. "I'm not mistaken," she said. "I saw you with him at the coffee shop. You were holding hands." Sarah's grip on my hand loosened, and she took a step back. "David, you need to be honest with me," she said. "I can't marry you if there's any doubt." I felt a wave of panic. "Sarah, I swear I haven't been unfaithful," I said. "I love you, and only you." The crowd was silent, watching the drama. I could feel their eyes on me. Finally, Sarah turned to the officiant. "I need a voice steady despite the tears." The officiant nodded and stepped back, giving us some space. Sarah and I walked away from the altar, finding a quiet corner. "David, I need to know the truth," she said, her voice breaking. "Have you been seeing someone else?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, Sarah. I don't know why my mother is saying these things, but I swear to you, I've been searching." Finally, she nodded. "I believe you," she said, "but we need to find out why your mother is doing this." We returned to the altar, and Sarah addressed the crowd. "We're going to take a short break," she said. "Please bear with us." We took my mother aside and demanded an explanation. She insisted she had seen Sarah with another man, but when pressed for details, her story started to fall apart. It became clear that she had misinterpreted what she saw. The man she had seen Sarah with was her cousin, visiting from out of town, and their interaction had been entirely innocent. My mother apologized profusely, but the damage had been done. The mood of the wedding was shattered, and Sarah and I were left to pick up the pieces. We managed to salvage the day, but it was a bittersweet celebration. In the end, Sarah and I got married, but the memory of my mother's objection lingered. It took time to rebuild the trust and joy that had been tainted by that moment of doubt. But we did it together, and our love grew stronger as a result. It wasn't the perfect wedding we had envisioned, but it was a testament to our resilience and commitment to each other, and that's what truly matters. Story 10. When I proposed to Lisa, I imagined our wedding day as a perfect blend of romance and celebration, a day that would mark the beginning of our life together. We planned every detail meticulously, ensuring everything would go off without a hitch. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and ours came in the form of Lisa's best friend, Jessica. The ceremony was beautiful. We stood under an arch of flowers, the sun casting a golden glow over everything. Our friends and family watched as we exchanged vows, tears of joy glistening in their eyes. Then the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. "I object!" The voice was clear and loud, cutting through the joyous atmosphere like a knife. Everyone turned to see Jessica standing, her face flushed. "Jessica, what are you doing?" Lisa asked, shock evident in her voice. Jessica walked forward, tears streaming down her face. "Lisa, I can't let you do this," she said. "You deserve to know the truth." I felt a wave of panic. "What truth?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica looked at me, then back at Lisa. "Lisa, I know you've been having doubts," she said. "You've told me yourself David is the—" Lisa's face turned pale. "Jessica, it was a long time ago," she said. "Things have changed." But Jessica shook her head. "Have they? You still talk about your doubts. I can't." I felt a surge of anger. "Jessica, this is not your place," I said. "Lisa and I have worked through our issues. We're ready for this." Lisa looked torn, her eyes filling with tears. "Jessica, doing this," she whispered. "Because I care about," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "Don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret." The crowd was silent, watching the drama unfold. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath. "Lisa, do you still have doubts?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lisa looked at me, her eyes full of pain. "I don't know," she said. "I thought I did, but now I'm not sure." I felt a wave of despair. "Lisa, I love you," I said. "I want to spend my life, but if you're not sure, we need to talk about." Lisa looked torn, glancing between Jessica and me. Finally, she nodded. "We need to talk," she said quietly. The officiant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he suggested. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Lisa and I found a quiet corner outside the venue, and I took her hands in mine. "Lisa, I need to know how you really feel," I said. "Do you want to marry me?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, David," she said, "but I have these doubts. I'm scared of making the wrong decision." I felt a lump in my throat. "It's okay to be scared," I said, "but we need to be sure. If you have doubts, we should talk about them." We spent the next hour talking, laying everything out in the open. It was painful but necessary. In the end, we decided to postpone the wedding. We needed time to sort through our feelings and make sure we were making the right choice. The guests were understanding, but the day was tinged with sadness. Lisa and I spent the next few months in couples therapy, working through our issues. It wasn't easy, but we came out stronger on the other side. Eventually, we rescheduled the wedding, and this time, there were no objections. We stood at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones, and exchanged vows with confidence and love. The memory of that first wedding attempt lingered, but it served as a reminder of how far we'd come. In the end, it wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned, but it was real and honest. And that made it even more. Story 11. My wedding day with Samantha was supposed to be the culmination of years of love and commitment. We had gone through so much together, and our relationship had only grown stronger. The ceremony was held at a beautiful vineyard with rows of grapevines providing a stunning backdrop. Everything was perfect until the moment someone objected. The ceremony was going smoothly. Samantha looked breathtaking in her dress, and I could barely contain my excitement. We were halfway through the vows when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. I glanced around, expecting nothing but smiles and nods of approval. "I object!" The voice came from my younger sister, Emily. She stood up, looking both angry and desperate. "Emily, what are you doing?" I asked, my heart pounding. Emily took a deep breath. "Can't let you marry her, Jack," she said, her voice shaking. "Samantha's been lying to you." Samantha's face turned white, and she tightened her grip on my hand. "Emily, this is not the time," she said through gritted teeth. But Emily was undeterred. "Jack, you need to know the truth," she continued. "Samantha has been seeing someone else. I saw her with another man." The guests gasped, and I felt like the ground was giving way beneath. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Emily stepped forward, holding up her "I have pictures," she said. "I saw them together at a restaurant last week." Samantha turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Jack, please, you have to believe me," she pleaded. "It's not what it looks like." I felt a mix of anger and confusion. "Emily, let me see those pictures," I said. She handed me her phone, and I looked at the photos. They showed Samantha with a man I didn't recognize, sitting close together and laughed. My heart sank. "Samantha, who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Samantha wiped away her tears. "It's a colleague from work," she said. "We were discussing a project." I looked into her eyes, searching. "Is that all it was?"
I asked. She nodded fervently.
Yes, Jack, I love you. I would never betray. Emily shook her head. Jack, you deserve better, she said softly. You can't trust her. I felt torn. I loved Samantha, but the doubt gnawed at me. Emily, why are you doing this? I asked, feeling betrayed. Because I care about you, Emily replied. I don't want you to get hurt. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should take a moment, he suggested. I took a deep breath. We need to talk, I said to Samantha, in private. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Samantha and I found a quiet spot among the grapes. Jack, you have to believe me, she said, her voice breaking. Nothing happened with that man. It's just work. I looked at her, my heart ached. Samantha, I love you, I said, but I need to know that I can trust you. You took my hands and...
You can trust Monsieur. There's nothing... I closed my eyes, trying to sort through my emotions. Finally, I nodded. I believe you, I said. We returned to the altar, and I addressed the guests. Thank you for your patience, I said. We will continue with the ceremony. The officiant resumed, and we exchanged our vows. But the mood had shifted. The joy and excitement had been replaced by a lingering tension. Emily sat quietly, her expression a mix of regret and concern. After the ceremony, Samantha and I talked to Emily. We explained the situation, and she apologized for causing such a scene. It took time, but eventually, we were able to move past it and rebuild the trust that had been shaken. Our marriage was stronger for it. We learned to communicate better and to always be honest with each other. And though the memory of that day still stings, it also serves as a reminder of the strength of our love and commitment. Story 12. When you're planning a wedding, you never expect that someone will actually object during the ceremony.
It's one of those things that seem more like a plot twist in a movie than something that could happen in real life. But on my wedding day to Chris, that plot twist became our reality. The ceremony was set in a lovely botanical garden with lush greenery and colorful flowers all around. The weather was perfect and everything was going according to plan. Chris and I were standing at the altar ready to exchange our vows when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections.
I object! The voice was firm and clear, and it came from Chris's best friend Dan. I felt a chill run down my spine as I turned to see him standing, his face set in determination. Dan, what are you doing? Chris asked, clearly shocked. Dan looked at Chris, then at me. I'm sorry, Chris, but I can't let you go through with this, he said. Megan deserves to know the truth. I felt my heart skip a beat. What truth? I asked, my voice shaking. Dan took a deep breath. Chris has been hiding something from you, he said. He's been gambling again. The crowd gasped, and I felt a wave of nausea. Is this true, Chris? I asked, looking at him. Chris's face turned pale. Megan, I can explain, he said. It's not as bad as it sounds. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. Not as bad as it sounds, I repeated. You promised me you had stopped. Chris reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Megan, please, let me explain, he said. Danced. Megan, I found out a few weeks ago, he said. I tried to get Chris to come clean, but he wouldn't. I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth. Chris, how could you do this? I asked, my voice breaking. Chris looked desperate. Megan, I'm sorry, he said. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to worry you. The officiant cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a... The world was crumbling around me.
We need to talk, I said to Chris. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in a tense silence. Chris and I found a secluded spot in the garden. Chris, you promised me you had stopped gambling, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. I know. And I did stop for a while, he said. But then, things got tough at work and I started again. I didn't want to worry you, so I tried to handle it on my own. I felt a lump in my throat. You should have told me, I said. We could have faced it together. He took my hands in his. I know, and I'm so sorry, he said. I love you, Megan. I don't want to lose you. I looked into his eyes, searching. Chris, I love you too, I said. But we can't start our marriage with secrets and lies. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand, he said. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Returned to the altar, and I addressed the guests. Thank you for your patience, I said. Chris and I have decided to postpone the wedding. We need to work through some things first. The guests murmured in understanding, and we walked away from the ceremony hand in hand. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. Chris and I spent the next few months in counseling, working through his gambling addiction and rebuilding our trust. Eventually, we rescheduled the wedding. This time, there were no objections. We stood at the altar surrounded by our loved ones and exchanged vows with a deeper understanding of what it means to be partners. The memory of that first attempt at our wedding still stings, but it also reminds us of the strength of our love and commitment. It wasn't the fairy tale we had imagined, but it was real and honest. And that made it even more beautiful. Story 13. Our wedding day had all the makings of a perfect celebration, Natalie and I had chosen a beautiful beachside location, complete with a backdrop of rolling waves and a golden sunset. The ceremony was intimate, with only our closest friends and family present. Everything was going smoothly, until the moment someone objected. The officiant had just asked the fateful question, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." I glanced around, expecting nothing but smiles and happy tears. "I object!" The voice came from my former college roommate, Kyle. He stood up, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Kyle, what the hell?" I asked, my heart pounding. Kyle stepped forward, his face etched with concern. "I'm sorry, Jake, but I can't let you go through with this without knowing the truth." Natalie's grip on my hand tight. "Kyle, this is not the time," she said, her voice shaking. But Kyle was undeterred. "Jake, you need to know something," he said. "Natalie and we had a thing, and it didn't end well." The crowd gasped, and I felt like the ground was shifting beneath. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Kyle looked at me, then at Natalie. "We dated briefly before you two got together," he said. "I never told you because it seemed irrelevant, but now I realize you deserved." Natalie's face. "Jake, it's true," she said, "but it was a long time ago and it meant nothing. I felt a mix of anger. Why didn't you tell me?" Natalie wiped away a tear. "I didn't think it was before we started dating. I didn't want to cause any unnecessary." Kyle stepped closer. "Jake, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to complicate things, but I couldn't keep this from you any longer." The officiant cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he suggested. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed. "We need to talk," I said to Natalie. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Natalie and I found a quiet spot by the... "Jake, you have to believe me," Natalie said, her voice breaking. "It was a brief fling and it meant nothing. I love you and only you." "I wish you had told the past. It's about trust." "I know. I'm sorry. I should have been honest." Closed my eyes, trying to sort. "Finally leave. We need to work on our..." Return to address the guests. "Thank you for your patience," I said. "We will continue with the ceremony." The officiant resumed, and we exchanged our vows, but the mood had shifted. The joy and excitement had been replaced by a lingering tension. Kyle's expression a mix of regret and concern. After the ceremony, Natalie and I talked to Kyle. We explained the situation, and he apologized for causing such a scene. It took time, but eventually we were able to move past it and rebuild the trust that had been shaken. Our marriage was stronger. We learned to communicate better and to always be honest with each other. And though the memory of that day still stings, it also serves as a reminder of the strength of our love and commitment. It wasn't the perfect wedding we had envisioned, but it was a testament to our resilience and dedication to each other, and that's what truly matters. Story 14. My wedding to Lisa was set in a charming little chapel on the edge of town. It was a picturesque setting with stained glass windows and beautiful wooden pews. We had spent months planning every detail, and everything was coming together perfect. That is, until the moment someone objected. The ceremony was underway, and we were standing at the altar, ready to exchange our vows. The officiant asked the fateful question, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." A hush fell over the crowd, and I felt a sense of relief. But then from the back of the chapel, a voice called out, "I object!" Everyone turned to see who it was. Standing there was Lisa's sister, Karen. She looked angry and determined. "Karen, what are you doing?" Lisa asked, her voice edged with panic. Karen walked forward, her eyes locked on Lisa. "I can't let you marry him," she said. "Lisa, you deserve to know the truth." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What truth?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen looked at me, then back at Lisa. "Lisa, I know you love David, but he's been hiding something from you," she said. "He's been seeing someone else." The crowd gasped, and I felt like the ground was giving way beneath me. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Karen stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I have messages," she said. "I saw them. He's been texting another woman." Lisa turned to me, her face pale. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head vehemently. "No, it's not true," I said. "Karen, you're making a huge mistake." But Karen wasn't backing down. "I saw the messages," she insisted. "I have proof." Lisa looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "David, please tell me this isn't true," she whispered. I felt a wave of desperation. "Lisa, I promise you, I haven't been unfaithful," I said. "Karen must be mistaken." Karen handed her phone to Lisa, and she looked at the message. Her face turned even paler, and she handed the phone to me. I looked at the screen and saw messages that appeared to be from me talking to her. "These are fake," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone must have doctored these." The officiant cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take," he suggested. I nodded, feeling like the world was crumbling around me. "We need to talk," I said to Lisa. We stepped away from the altar, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Lisa and I found a quiet corner in the chapel. "Lisa, you have to believe me," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know how those messages got on Karen's phone, but they're not from me." She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. "David, I want to believe you," she said, "but I don't know what to think." I took her hands and, "I love you, Lisa," I said. "I would never do anything to hurt you. We need to find out who did this and why." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," she said, "but we can't go on with the wedding until we know the truth." We returned to the altar and I addressed the guests. "Thank you for your patience," I said. "Lisa and I have decided to postpone the wedding until we can clear this up." The guests murmured in understanding, and we walked away from the ceremony hand in hand. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. We spent the next few weeks investigating the messages and discovered that Karen had been manipulated by someone who wanted to sabotage our wedding. Once we had the truth, we rescheduled the wedding. This time, there were no objections. We stood at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones, and exchanged vows with a deeper understanding of trust and commitment. The memory of that first attempt at our wedding still stings, but it also serves as a reminder of the strength of our love and determination. It wasn't the fairy tale we had imagined, but it was real and honest, and that made it even more